Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Launch Minnesota's monthly Friday Forum. We do these once a month on the fourth Friday, and we always cover a different topic that is affecting or interesting to startups in Minnesota. And today we are lucky enough to be joined by two wonderful representatives from Minnesota Cup, state's largest startup competition. John Staving and Kaylin Oliver. I am going to turn it over to them, and they're going to tell you a little bit about the competition, what you got to know about this year, and we're also going to hear from some past participants about their experiences. Take it away, you guys.
Great, thanks, Maddie. We appreciate you having us on today and see a lot of familiar faces, both some past winners, some judges, some mentors involved. So we'll invite other folks to chime in as we go along. But we want to spend most of today hearing from three of our former winners and letting them share their experiences firsthand. But I just want to set up our discussion a little bit and start with a sharing of a presentation. If you can see that okay now. That Minnesota Cup, we started it back in 2005, kind of before there were accelerators or the level of activity that we have in the entrepreneurial community, but we've continued it and have partnered with the co-founders, Scott Lippman and Dan Mallon, and helped over 20,000 entrepreneurs over the last 18 years. So we're entering into our 19th year. We've given out over $5 million in non-dilutive cash prizes. So this is not taking equity in the companies. We've had a few companies offer to give back in terms of some equity, but these are non-dilutive cash prizes, so we don't inflate that amounts with a lot of additional in-kind offers. These are cash prizes given directly to the companies with no strings attached. Over time, we've expanded in terms of the number of the divisions and partnered with organizations like General Mills and ECMC and Xcel Energy and others to develop new divisions, and have expanded it now and quite frankly look at it less as a judging process and more of a way to get connected with folks in the community. And I think the folks that are judging within the divisions really see their role in terms of helping these companies go forward and get connected. And there's some great discussions. And we're really excited this year as well as we go forward to have a lot more of that interaction face-to-face. We'll do some of the judging online, but we're going to have some events in June and then some of the judging in September that will be back and in person the way we've done it previously. And we're quite proud in terms of the companies that have gone on in the process. And as we look at some of the most successful startups in the Twin Cities and across Minnesota, these companies have gone on to raise over $1 billion in capital. And some of the When I Works and 75Fs and Civic Eagles and Habitawares and Johnny Pops, it's really exciting to see where they're growing. And we view the Minnesota Cup, the goal has always been to help drive economic growth in Minnesota and job creation. And we're excited. And on the right, you see a couple of the teams from last year, the BKB Floral Foam, the winner, but also Carbon Origins that we had at the university just last week. And we're excited about their prospects as they were runner-up last year. So in terms of a quick headline, in terms of why to enter, I remember the first year we dangled $30,000 in cash prizes and thought that would be the big carrot that would get the entrepreneurs coming out. And what we realized is that there were a lot of entrepreneurs that were kicking around ideas, but the challenge was more getting connected with the resources and with the community that could help them grow their businesses. So you're welcome to enter for the cash, but I think what we hear consistently in terms of the value that the companies get through going through the process is more some initial feedback on the idea. We've got a group of amazing 100+ mentors that are paired up, and all of the semifinalists or the top 10 in each of the divisions that are selected in May get paired up with 2 mentors over the summer to help them on their round 2 deliverables. We also have educational workshops that Deluxe Corporation's provided some funding so that we can bring in some of our top faculty, and especially around some of the the marketing areas. So we have those for the semifinalists, and we'll be doing that again this year. And a number of our sponsors have workshops and events as well to help out the companies. And lastly, just in terms of connection to the resources, we see Minnesota Cup really as the first step in launching a business in Minnesota, and are proud of our relationships with a lot of the other accelerators, with the other angel groups, and enjoy seeing the companies that have gone through the Minnesota Cup take advantage of those resources. So this is a great easy way for somebody with an idea to come forward and start meeting not only the mentors, but through the judges and through whether it's Go for Angels or Beta or Techstars. A lot of these companies have gone on and found other paths to success. We're also proud and recently went through the Launch Minnesota funding that a number of companies have received throughout the state. And as you go through the list of nearly 100 companies that have received capital from the state, over 60% of those have participated in the Minnesota Cup. So it's a great, easy way to get started and get access to additional resources, both individuals and capital. And we see a number of companies that come through, looking to raise their profile locally. As you're looking to go out and recruit, it's a good way to get known within the community. And a large part of our role in terms of the Minnesota Cup is really creating awareness and celebrating the companies that come through. So we're proud that the Secretary of State, both Mark Ritchie and now Steve Simon, we'll be sending out a letter within the next month encouraging every company, every business owner in the state to move forward. We see our role really in terms of working with a lot of the leading corporations across the state to provide seed capital to the most promising startups in the state. So it's a really unique public-private partnership that we're proud of. Applications are going to be opening 2 weeks from Monday. So we're starting to call this our March Madness in terms of events that we'll be having to create awareness for the program. So we'll be hosting in-person events. These are 4 of the major ones, and we'll be adding and having some additional ones as well from some of our sponsors, but particularly focusing in some of the areas around inclusive and driving equity in the startup community. We're proud that from over the 18 years history of the Minnesota Cup that we've really driven a strong increase. This last year in 2022, we set records in terms of 47% of the participants were women, and 40% of the participants were entrepreneurs of color. So that's we're hoping 2023, and I know Morgan will probably give a good plug for it on the panel, hoping 2023 might be the year when women take the majority, and we show that that's no longer a barrier in terms of getting started here. But we'll have a number of events around capital. March 9th, we're working with Brown Venture Group and having an event around pro bono access to helping to secure patents. On the 22nd, we're going to highlight a number of women entrepreneurs that have gone through the process, and also some of the amazing mentors that we have. And we're going to be welcoming at the end of March the new Timberwolves owner, Mark Lohr, for a fun event. So we'll have a lot of activity, but certainly want to create awareness for this free opportunity, and hopefully make these resources available to a broader set of the emerging entrepreneurs. And if you're on the call here wondering, if this is for you, and I think we'll have a couple of the folks that are on the panel. Sorry, I stopped short of that slide. That we'll have, it's oftentimes not a one-shot opportunity in terms of the companies coming through. And I know Ping Ye from Stemonics, which is one of the former winners, I think entered at least 3 times. And I think our overall winner, John Dennison at Orthocore Medical, entered 5 times, and saw this as a worthwhile process to go through, and something that he got more and more value out of each and every time. So it's not just a one shot, and and you really can't be too early in terms of going through the process. Companies like When I Work came through, when Chad Halverson was a very small team and early with their idea, met some people. I think John Tedesco was one of his mentors. Ken Hollick was another one that helped them and guide, and eventually were on the advisory board or helped to guide him through when he came back the second time 3 or 4 years later, had momentum on the company and won the high tech division. So hopefully this is a process that's worthwhile for companies at the very early stages. Often, we talk about it being kind of no tech to high tech, and really from idea all the way through, starting to scale up. The only limitation we have is that you're based in Minnesota, and that you don't have more than $1 million in your last year's historical revenue. So with that set up, I'm going to hand it over to Kaylin Oliver, who's helping to lead this year's competition, and let her introduce the panelists.
Thank you, John. He gave you a little bit of a spoiler about who's here to speak today, but I would love to start with each panelist giving just kind of a brief introduction, who you are, what your company is, and then what your MinCup experience, what division you participated in, all of that. Chris, you are the first on my screen, and we'd love to start with you.
Perfect. Sounds good. So I'm Chris Lukenbill. I'm with Sherpa. Sherpa, we help visitors bureaus connect with content creators and local community members to be able to create content to highlight their community. So highlighting what's amazing about their communities. And that's something that we actually entered into the Minnesota Cup twice with Sherpa. As we saw on the list there, we were in 2020 and 2021, both in the high tech division. We were a finalist the first year and then the division winner the second year. So is there anything else that I missed for the intro on that?
That's perfect.
We're good. All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Morgan, you want to go next?
For sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Kerfeld. I'm a co-founder of Tilo, and we are developing activity tracking assistive walking devices, specifically a rollator walker and walking canes. And we were the runner-up in the student division in 2021, and then came back last year and won the general division.
Amazing. Ian?
Hi, Ian Butcher. So husband of the founder of our business, BKB Floral. The company was set up to develop a compostable floral foam. We did an initial research program with the university starting back in 2016. We just entered once last year and were successful in the competition and very positive about the experience.
Great, thank you. So John mentioned a whole lot of reasons that you should enter the Minnesota Cup, but I'd love to hear from all of our founders on what their company's biggest takeaway was. Ian, you want to start?
Sure. So we had done an initial fundraising at the beginning of 2022. So we were sort of getting ready to gear up our business during last year and setting up a lab in Minneapolis, because we'd recruited an original PhD student from the university, although doing his postdoc in Santa Barbara, decided when he joined us, he wanted to be back in Minneapolis. Who knew? But that worked out very well for us. We sort of stumbled across the MN Cup early in the year and decided that it looked very interesting and would probably be a good discipline for us as we started to gear up the business. And when I say gear up the business, at that point we only had one full-time person, who was that student, our chief technology officer. He then recruited another scientist to work with him in the lab in Minneapolis. And then my wife and I, she was the founder of the business and the inspiration for the business, and I was sort of helping on the money side of things. And of course, it was very easy to enter. I think it was a one-page document, what you were all about. And so we put that one pager together and didn't think too much about it. And then were told that we were in the competition, and the next stage required us to produce rather more information. We had little idea, I think, what we were in for when we first started, because the process, if you go through the different stages, can be quite rigorous in terms of business plans that judges and expect you to have if you get through to later stages of the competition. but that actually was very good for us. It did get us to think a bit more long term, more quickly than we might have done otherwise. We pulled in someone to help us with financial modeling, who is now our full-time CFO. Again, somebody else who's moved from the East Coast to Minneapolis with his girlfriend. So we're sort of helping population growth in Minneapolis. But having him on board to help with financial modeling was really helpful. It did allow us to bring in some more sort of friends of ours to give us some of their experiences in startup companies. And I think just accelerated our whole process of growth during 2022. We had actually got patents on our technology early in the year. But because we were successful in winning our division and then ultimately the competition, it again helped enormously with the profile of the company, and not just in Minnesota. But because of our particular position in the floral business, that's pretty international, very social media intensive environment, and so a lot of inquiries from people throughout the US and even further afield, including Australia, who read about our MN Cup win because it got reported in some publication in Holland. And the bottom line is, it enabled us to, I think, move the company forward more quickly. We'll be announcing next week that we've just completed our second fundraising, where we've raised $3 million, which is, going to take us forward for the next couple of years in commercializing our technology. But bottom line is, big fans. We had two mentors that we had access to, one of whom was, particularly made time available to us and was very helpful. And in fact, he won, not quite sure what it was, John, but, one of the sort of mentors of the year last year, which he was tickled pink about because he'd done mentoring for about 15 or 16 years. And so was delighted to get that sort of recognition. And also, by the way, has become an investor in the company and has brought a number of other Minneapolis people in as investors in the company. So, can't speak highly enough about all that the MN Cup did for BKB in 2022.
Thank you. Congratulations, Ian. That's incredible. Morgan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and congratulations, Ian, getting that second fundraising round. That's awesome, especially coming out of Minnesota Cup. TILO had somewhat different motivations for the two times that we entered the competition. The first year, we were in the student division, and the company really was very early staged. And so we had some renders of what we thought the product could look like. We had somewhat of an idea of what our business model would be, but hadn't really done all of the stages to actually develop a full business model, a full pitch deck, et cetera. So that first year was really an opportunity to somewhat force us to kind of go through those motions of developing all of the things you need to really say that you have a business opportunity that could be viable going forward. So that first year, mostly around trying to gain expertise and experience just in the area of starting a company, in addition to having that mentorship opportunity. So getting individuals who have been successful in the startup industry before, helping us along that journey of trying to start our own thing. Honestly, the funding the first year was just kind of a cherry on the top. We really were just trying to get the experience and knowledge and mentorship opportunities. That second year when we came back, we had a prototype at that point. We were starting to scale the company and really were thinking about how to bring it to market. So the motivations there were more so about trying to gain network connections, specifically in manufacturing distribution. Our mentor that year ended up being Susan Otten, who is the founder of Indie Do Good, which is a distribution company in Minnesota, and someone that we're connecting with about kind of moving forward as our distribution partner. So that second year was more so focused on how can we build a community within Minnesota more now that we're scaling the company. And then also at that point, non-dilutive funding was something that we really were trying to fund the entire company through and are still on that line. And so that second year was about also getting some funding into the company to make sure that we could continue to support ourselves now that at that point we weren't students anymore.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. Chris.
Excellent. Yes. So actually our experience was relatively similar to Morgan with Tilo as far as the development of our company from year 1 to year 2. So from year 1, it was really the beginning of what our business model was. And so at that point was when we were just starting to transition into our business model around selling to visitors bureaus, trying to basically the bootstrap model that allows us to be able to go, right? So we're a content platform, and originally we were looking at it and saying, well, we could go directly to the kind of consumer side of things, but the challenge with that is then you have to go investment capital on that, right? So go to the investment side of things. And so what we did when we were going into this side of it, to be able to get the kind of business model built out for that, was really trying to think through all of the different aspects of that. And that year 1 really helped us to be able to kind of plan that business model out, think about our model from an outsider's perspective of, we've had the kind of industry knowledge that we had bringing into it, and really thinking about, well, how does that look as far as both investment and then even from a customer's perspective, what does that model entail? And so being able to put that time into it year 1 was really valuable for that. The other piece that it really helped us with was with mentorship. So Elizabeth Caven was our mentor in year 1 and year 2. She was a phenomenal mentor for us on both of those years. And that was something, being able to have that experience with mentorship, we've continued to use that. We're actually part of the MESA mentoring program here in Minnesota as well. And I think that first initial introduction to that through Elizabeth Caven was a really helpful way for us to be able to see the amount of value that we could get from a good mentor, that would, really help to accelerate our business. So, and then year 2 going into it, we actually started to have some traction there. So we had customers by that point, we had revenue. We had done a lot of the things that we had said we were going to do year 1, right? So being able to show some of that traction, saying, yes, this is actually what we're able to do from that. And for year 2, it was just a ability to be able to kind of refine things a little bit more and be able to talk about it a little bit further. We had already in the first year done a lot of the work that we needed for year 2 already. And so that helped to make that process a little bit easier. And then at that point, it was just a matter of kind of polishing things up. So both years were a lot of really good experience. And then even previous to that, personally, I had a lot of development in previous companies. I actually applied 3 times previous to these with other companies. Never made it into the semifinals even with those. But being able to just apply, it's again that another experience to be able to think about it a little bit more holistically, have that outsider's perspective that you're trying to kind of talk things through. And so, no matter how far you make it into the program, I think you can get a lot of value out of it.
To echo Chris, I also applied with a different company prior to Tilo and did not make it to the semifinalists, but it was incredibly valuable feedback as I was thinking of bringing that company forward. So definitely apply, even if it's just an idea.
Yeah.
Amazing. Perfect. That's also a point that we really want to emphasize is even with just an idea, please apply. It's not too early for you and your company. All right, a couple of you touched on this already, but I'd love to hear more about the connections that you make. We often hear that networking is one of the biggest takeaways that people get from the cup and the competition. So I'd love to hear mentorship, other connections, publicity, what that offered to your company and brought to you. Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, so for us, really mentorship was the biggest thing. We had never really focused on the venture capital side of things. I know if you're really looking at venture capital, I think there's a lot of really great connections you can get from it just because of the networks that are already pre-baked into it. There's so many people that are part of the industries that it's just a natural fit for them when they're looking for deal flow to be able to find it from these avenues. And then also have so many more eyeballs on it. And when you think about it through the process, it's very similar as far as what they're judging you on. The whole point of the judging it is they're going to give you some money, right? They're going to give you some funding, even though it's not out of their book of business. It's still that same type of decision of who's going to be able to be most effective with that capital, right? Who's going to be able to put that to work, right? And so it's a similar type of judging process that's going on. So I definitely, no matter if you're going venture capital route or the bootstrap route that we've gone, both of those can be really valuable to be able to get those kind of networking side of it built out. For us, again, the mentorship was really the biggest part of that. That was one of the biggest things that we were able to get from that. We were already pretty tied into the entrepreneurship community through the Southeast Minnesota kind of work that we've done here, both with E1 and then previous to that with Collider, of course. And so being able to have that connection was something that we had already kind of built up. But if you don't have that connection built up, it can definitely be a really quick way to be able to introduce yourself into those networks, especially with some of these programs that, I think almost all of those programs now in the regional efforts are kind of partnering themselves up with the Minnesota Cup to be able to do things like the Ignite Cup, which is actually 2020. The way that we got into it was through the Ignite Cup. So being able to do those things to kind of get yourself as a part of the program is a really way to be able to kind of start it from your regional effort to move it to the state.
Amazing. Way to highlight Launch Minnesota. I'm sure Maddie appreciates that. Morgan, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll echo what Chris said. I think the mentorship and just network that you get out of the Minnesota Cup is probably one of the most valuable components of the experience. For us, our first year specifically, our team was matched with an extremely strong female founder, Lee Jones from Rebiotics, which I think as a young female founder, that was really impactful for me specifically because it gave me a lens into someone who looked like me, was in the same space as me, really being successful. So it gave me kind of the confidence to move forward. And then our second year being partnered with Susanit, as I had mentioned in my prior kind of response, was extremely helpful in terms of thinking through our distribution and supplier strategy. And even now being a potential partner moving forward is really cool to see. So it sets you up for really great success and just have individuals that you can go talk to. For example, Susan just got back from doing the Appalachian Trail. It was a very long through hike and something I've always wanted to do. So just even having that as a mentor of saying, oh, you're doing stuff in your personal life that I'm also really interested in is awesome. It's amazing the connections that happen. And then outside of kind of your actual mentors, just the introduction to the ecosystem of all the resources in Minnesota is extremely helpful. So after our first year in the student division, we went on to get a Launch Minnesota grant, which we now still have through August. That is extremely helpful for us, especially we're doing similar to Chris bootstrapping. So, that matching grant goes a really long way for our company. And then other opportunities, different competitions that you get told about, different grant opportunities, being connected with the SBIR Accelerator and Pat Dillon has been super beneficial for us, all the way to university connections as we think through doing clinical trials. I mean, all of it kind of comes back to Minnesota Cup, and that's how people either know about us or that's how we're getting connected to individuals in the ecosystem. So yeah, we would not be where we are today without Minnesota Cup by any means. And the mentorship that we have gotten through it has been what's really propelled us forward over the last 2 years.
Amazing. Thank you. All right, Ian.
Well, I guess a couple of parts. So whilst we had connections in Minneapolis, we had done our original research with the university. We didn't have any contacts at all with the business community. I think that the MN Cup gave us that, both financial, but also wider than the financial community, because obviously the angel investors and VCs, are very interested and are around and accessible through, certainly if you get to the latter stages of the MN Cup. Our mentor was very helpful, both during the competition and, as I mentioned to you, I think also helping us access other investors afterwards, not just in Minneapolis actually, but also in New York. And he and I had backgrounds that were somewhat similar. He spent a lot of his time in the UK, which is where I'm from, with international businesses there. So, we were on the sort of same wavelength. And, he also lives close to where our new R&D facility is. So that's very helpful. He's spending time with us now. And the reach into the business community has been very helpful. This fundraising round that we're just completing, we used a lawyer in Minneapolis that we were introduced to through the MN Cup and his community, John, I'm sure knows who I'm referring to, and his connections with the angel community, Jeff. And in fact, we're now looking for a bank in Minneapolis to work with us. So we're trying to sort of deepen our roots with the business community in Minnesota. One of the other applications for our foam, which is, I think, potentially quite exciting, is actually in hydroponics and indoor growing. And through one of the mentors that we've now got associated with post-CMN Cup, we've been introduced to two very substantial hydroponics businesses. Who knew that in Minnesota was based the biggest greens grower in the United States in greenhouses. And so, the tentacles keep spreading. And I'm actually flying to Minnesota on Minneapolis on Sunday. I'll be there, and my wife and I are there quite a bit nowadays, and we're enjoying glad to be missing the snow that you had in the last few days, but we're enjoying the experience and strengthening our relationship with the university again, because that second part of our business in indoor growing, the university, probably a lot of people don't know, has an incredible arboretum, greenhouse, horticultural, biological program that is going to be very helpful to us again, I think.
Amazing. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we really pride ourselves in the connections that we have to the community and that we can provide to all of our founders. Launch Minnesota itself, we realized a couple of weeks ago that 60% of their innovation grantees have been through the Minnesota Cup, which is a pretty incredible connection that we have with them. Mm-hmm. So like Morgan and Chris and Ian all mentioned, it's a great launching point for making more connections here. So you all have touched on this a little bit already, but I'd love to hear more about what the actual work that you have to do through the competition and how that helps your company, whether it's the initial application, how that helps you think deeper, or round 2 materials, the pitch decks, all of those. How has that helped grow your company and how you're thinking about it? Morgan, would you like to start?
Yeah, definitely. So the first part of the application, so what I think John dropped in the chats, opens March 13th. Yes. That is really pretty simple in a sense. It's, I think, a 1 to 2 page initial submission talking about the opportunity and the impact that the company can have, progress that you've had so far. I think that's a great opportunity to, first, if you just have an idea, it almost forces you to think through all the high level details of what goes into that idea. If you have a more well-rounded company, it's thinking through what does that executive summary in a way look like for your organization, which if you're going through the fundraising or even if you're applying to other companies, you will reuse that over and over and over again with little tweaks depending on the different flair those have on it. Once you get past that first stage and everyone gets feedback, can I get a nod from, okay. Yes. Yeah, so everyone gets feedback based off of your initial submission, even if your idea does not make it through, which is really beneficial. It was beneficial when I applied and didn't make it through because it helped me think through how to move forward. And then the second round is a little more robust. So at this point you will do and if I get this wrong, someone please stop me, but it's, I believe, a 10-page business model, an investor pitch deck, and then a 1-minute video. And those are all 3 elements of things that you just need when you have a company, regardless of if you're raising funding, because when you start to talk to individuals about your company, though the questions that they're going to ask you are questions that you should have outlined in one of those 3 modes of information. And so by getting to that second stage and going through the semifinalist round, by the end of that round, you have some really solid resources on your company that have been vetted and given feedback by top industry leaders in the state and mentors, which is really beneficial, even if you don't make it to that final round. If you do make it to that final round, you do a presentation live for the judges. I believe it's a 12-minute pitch and 8-ish minute Q&A. And that is a great opportunity somewhat to just kind of show off what you've done. At that point, you probably have thought through a lot of the information already by going through that semifinalist round, but this is your opportunity to actually get to present it, be super enthusiastic about all of the work that you've done and get that live feedback from the judges. And it's also really helpful to know, the questions that the judges ask you after the presentation obviously you probably did not put that information well enough in your pitch deck and your presentation. So it does help moving forward as you think about doing more pitches and presentations. How might you tweak your actual materials that you're going through during the presentation to almost stop those questions from needing to be asked later stage? Yeah, good.
Amazing. You've got the whole thing memorized. I'm very impressed.
Gone
Yes.
through it twice.
I love it.
Sure.
Actually, one of the changes that we're making this year that our 3 panelists might be a little bit jealous of is that 10-page business plan is moving to a 2-page executive summary, as we're seeing that's what a lot of
No.
investors are changing to. I know. So that'll make the lift a little bit easier, but hopefully more helpful moving forward for companies. Ian, would you like to touch on this?
Well, I'm glad you could remember all those different stages and how many pages. No, I think, as I probably said, a little earlier, I think the discipline, because as last year, in February last year, we had our first full-time person. Of course, we've been working on the business, in the background for some while, but having to produce that original 1 to 2 page document on the business, that made us think, I think, a little more deeply than we might have done. But then when we got to the next stage and we had to produce the business plan, the pitch deck, and the video, then it starts to get a bit more serious. I was spending a lot of time in my study, and my wife was saying, "What is this MN Cup thing all about? Why are we spending so much time, or you spending so much time on it?" But I can't speak highly enough of the value of having to do that, particularly when you are an early stage business, and it's all in your mind, that you've got a pretty good idea of where you want to take a company and what you want to do with it, but to actually have to reduce that into a format that you've been told what the format is, and it's quite structured, is testing, and particularly when you start appearing at later stage in front of the judges and get questioned on it, the Q&A session, it just does make you think a little more deeply about some of the elements of your business than you would be inclined to do, particularly at that stage. We weren't thinking of going for any more funding, so we didn't have to spend too much time on those things. And since then, of course, because we have moved into a funding mode, I mean, we can revise a pitch deck and flex those sort of things very easily now, because we had to, and that's just hugely valuable for later stages of the business.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I think everybody else covered it really well. I would just echo what they said as far as all of those different stages. There's so much work to be able to put into those. And I think the 2 things that I wanted to call out, kind of in addition to what was already said, was one is during each one of those steps to really just take the time to put that work into all of those. You're just getting a lot of value out of the time that you're putting into it. I know we spent a lot of time, especially the first year, going to every single one of the events that was put on. We actually contracted some of the presenters to do some contract work and consulting for us, to be able to help us even further from the the work that they were presenting on and kind of helping us out with. And we got a lot of value from that, just being able to put the extra work, even if it wasn't maybe necessary just to be able to continue on, it was just still really necessary for us to be able to help improve our company. And then I think Morgan highlighted a really good point there when it came down to that final presentation in the Q&A from the judges, the Q&A from who you were presenting to in that last pitch. Just hearing the questions really helps to get the idea across of, oh, I thought I explained that really well, and really I didn't. And when you hear those questions, you start to understand, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. That's how they were viewing it this entire time that I was trying to do this pitch, and now we were totally somewhere else, right? So, being able to hear some of those questions, being able to go through that process, I think that's, so valuable in each one of those steps. So just really, put the time into it and value the work that you're putting into each one of those steps.
Perfect. Thank you. My last question before we move into the audience asking questions of John and I and our panelists is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a founder that's thinking about applying for application period this year? Chris, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think no matter where you're at with your business, as far as how early you are, how far down the process you are, just value each one of these points that you put into it. So even if you're just getting to apply for the first part, if you don't make it in the semifinalist portion of it, put that work into it with that first piece, just to be able to get the value out of putting the work in thinking through it, in getting the feedback from that, right? So, I think the more that you put into this at each one of the steps, the more that you put into it, the more that you get out of it. And so put the work into it to be able to get that value out of it.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. Ian.
Well, I just endorse what Chris said, but also I think because our CTO's full time in Minneapolis, like Chris, he took advantage of all the meetings that were arranged by the university, all the help that is given to early stage companies who are taking part in the competition. Pre the real mentoring stage, just the advice of people who've been through it before, and the people at Carlson School that are brought to bear on it, I think will be very valuable for any early stage company, because you'll make connections and again get thinking about some things that otherwise you might not think of, because one can sort of lock yourself away in these early stages of business and have not too much interaction with the outside world. I think it's a great opportunity to start getting out there and talking about what your business plans might be.
Perfect. Morgan, want to finish this off?
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to offer two pieces of advice. I hope that's okay. The first one would be, if you're on the fence about applying or not, just apply. There's really no risk in applying, and all you're going to get is valuable feedback on an idea that you have, no matter how early stage it is. And then the second piece of feedback, which is very similar to what Chris and Ian were saying, is just seek feedback while you're going through these different processes. Reach out to your network, have people kind of look at it with a magnifying glass and let you know where there's gaps and where you should do more research. I think that's extremely beneficial regardless of how far you make it in the competition for pushing your business idea forward.
Amazing. All great pieces of advice. Thank you to you three for taking some time this morning. I really appreciate it. We'd now love to open it up for questions. If you have any questions for John and I, or for any of our panelists, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I have a question. Morgan had touched on it a little bit, but as far as pairing with mentors, how is that done? You try and pair someone in the industry, or what is the process and the pool of mentors that you're then pulling from?
Yeah, I can probably take that. We didn't have mentors the first year, and I think realized pretty quickly that was one of the biggest areas of potential value, and had actually Brad Cleveland, who was a good friend of mine at Protolabs at the time, offered and had his CEO roundtable group start off, and it quickly took off and went from 5 to 10 to 30 and 50 and 100. So we try and get a pool of folks with either entrepreneurial experience. A lot on the sales and marketing side is quite valuable, particularly in some of the CPG areas. Folks with some financing experience are usually pretty popular, or access to capital that can coach on that. Some of the product development, some attorneys even on the intellectual property. So we try and lay out kind of a broad scope of capabilities, and then we let the companies preference. We share all of the biographies with all of the semifinalists and let them preference their top 5. And oftentimes it kind of fills in a gap. When you're a couple of founders, you're not covering every area, and being able to tap into somebody else is really helpful. And having, as Morgan talked about, successful entrepreneurs like a Lee Jones, able to give you, some strategic advice, and, oftentimes stay involved. And we've had, a number of folks that have, stayed involved as advisors or, on boards going forward. So some really cool relationships, but we let the companies really select that and have the majority of them are getting their first or second pick.
Feel free to throw questions in the chat too.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I don't know how to start the video. Do participants have an opportunity to interact a lot with other company startup participants, or is the interaction mostly between the participants and the mentors? Just wondering if there are any events for networking just with other people that are early stage.
Yeah, that's something we're excited to bring back more of this year. And I think oftentimes entrepreneurship, particularly in the early stages, is a lonely process. And we find that it may not be for everyone, but a large majority of the companies really develop some great relationships with, particularly as you go through on the semifinalist round and folks in your industry, and then starting to meet some of the other judges. So we're bringing back on June 7th a semifinalist event where we'll have all 90 companies pitching for 1 minute in 3 different rooms. So it's a bit of a fire hose and fun event that we haven't been able to do since 2019. But that's a way that people start meeting each other and connecting. And I think having some other peers, just like Chris talked about, on the mentoring side, not trying to do this alone and developing a network of folks that can share advice across different businesses is really helpful. So we see a lot of that. Great question.
Mhm.
And welcome any of the panelists or the other participants to chime in on these and share their own perspectives also.
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Bennett. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Jeff, and then Karen, you'll be next. Thanks.
Okay.
Sure. Not a question, more of a plug for the process and the opportunity. I would say no idea is a bad idea. We're a sexual health and wellness company, and we were concerned as to whether or not we'd qualify for it, just given that society isn't comfortable with sexual health and wellness. But the past couple of years, we've gone through the process, and it's been great, and made it to the semifinalists 1 round. So any idea is not a bad idea for this competition, and I can't say enough great things about it. So we haven't won yet, but we're going to give it another go.
Awesome. We'll look forward to it.
Good
Jeff.
luck.
Karen, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I appreciate this. This is really good information that we're getting today. I have 2 questions. How many people typically apply, for the process? And then my next question is, how do you choose what category you should fall into? Because I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, and we talked through that with a number of the applicants. So if you wanted to shoot an email with your draft submission, or we'll have some office hours as we get into March. What's the predominant industry you're in, and is it, and oftentimes some of the impact division or the degree of the social impact you have can help drive that. That's probably the biggest choice there. But it's something we want the companies really to drive rather than us categorizing. And I think if you look at the prior year participants as well, so we can share some information on that. And I think the general division still tends to capture kind of a pretty broad range, and that tends to be the largest one. We've always had over 1,000 participants. The last couple of years have spiked, and each year has been over 2,000 in terms of individuals. Typically they're about 3 per team. So I think last year we had a total of 850 plans that came through from the first submission, which the judges had to narrow down to the top 90. And that's one of the reasons why we're kind of simplifying the deliverables a little bit. But I think one of the goals of this, I think, that Scott and Dan and I have always shared, has been, not making this a beauty contest and not having it be, additional work on the companies. That we really want to make sure that all of the work you're putting into the Minnesota Cup is the process you should be following to develop your business. And I think we were all proud when Lee Jones, dropped out of mentoring for us and started her Rebiotics company, and then to great surprise by us, entered the Minnesota Cup. And I called her up and said, that's cool that you're entering. We're a bit surprised. And she said, well, that's the process good businesses should follow in starting up their business. And I want to have my team go through that. So I think that discipline, again, without the extraneous activity. And when we started in 2005, we had a 15-page business plan, and I think realized over time that shorter ones were actually better, and that, as you go forward, tightening up that communication is more important with customers, investors, potential employees, and partners. So getting it down to the, where you have a presentation, you have a 2-page executive summary that can introduce your company and something you would actually use and keep fresh. And then having a short video that, a lot of the companies use on their website or use in promotional activities to explain what they do kind of in a different way. Those are elements that I think every startup needs to have and benefits from creating. So we try and keep those deliverables focused. But on the division side, we'd be happy to help. And I think usually it's on the impact division. And is it there are a lot of companies that are for profit that are involved in the impact division. I mean, Morgan, you probably went through that situation. You've got a big social drive and mission with your company. How did you decide?
Yeah, we went back and forth a lot. I mean, our product is very much focused on having a social impact on our users. I think we ended up going the general division route just because it felt a little maybe too high tech or product driven to necessarily be a great fit for the impact division. And we also at the time didn't have any financial tie to the social impact. So at the time we weren't, giving our revenue to a social impact or anything of that sort. It was really just the fact that the product was built with a social impact kind of mindset behind it. So we ended up feeling like we did fit a little better with the general division, just based off of where the product was at that point. But I think we could have probably done well in the impact division as well if we had went that route. It was really a toss up. We also were looking at the high tech division. We were also looking at the life science division. So we were going back and forth a lot. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer at the end of the day. It's just whatever you think fits your story the best at the time of submission.
Great. I see that Al from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is tipping us off. And one area we should mention, is that we have a number of sponsors that help out with additional prizes. That we talked about the desire to get more women and entrepreneurs of color involved. So we have prizes for the top woman-led company that Bench K-12 won last year, that the Carlson Family Foundation provides. We have a prize that comes through JP Morgan Chase and META for the top entrepreneur of color that I know Morgan's team won a couple of years ago with Rick on your team. We have a prize for the top Greater Minnesota company, so outside of the 7-county area. Also from the Carlson Family Foundation, trying to get more participation. I think we have, is it 85 counties or something like that in terms of have participated in the Minnesota Cup. So that's important for us. And the Green and Sustainable Chemistry Prize was won by BKB Floral last year, that the Minneapolis Pollution Control Agency helps provide as well. So we're trying to target certain areas, and if you know of sponsors that want to get areas started up. I know we've talked with Deed about the fintech area. Potentially, adding a new division there, just as we did with the food and ag division, and just as we did in youth with junior achievement, and just as we did with the education and training. So if there are other folks that you think would benefit from being involved in the Minnesota Cup, either as sponsors or judges or mentors, please reach out to myself or Kaylin, and we'd love to get more folks involved. Additional questions?
Last, excuse me, last call for questions.
Kathy, are you there in live or no? She'd jump off. I think she may have. Ping, are you there?
In the void.
Well, great. I think if that's all, then I will bring us to a close. John and Kaylin, thank you so much for helping us pull this together and sharing about the Minnesota Cup. Morgan, Chris, Ian, thank you for talking about your experiences and answering questions. We are very grateful to have the Minnesota Cup as a resource in our state. And then if you, a little plug for things coming up next with Launch Minnesota. If you like Friday forums, we are doing something in person called Welcoming Wednesdays, which is a similar format. You come and people just answer your business questions. We're doing these at co-working spaces throughout the state. Some of them are listed in the newsletter, which I just dropped. And then our startup calendar has a few additional dates. All of these are coming up on March 8th. If you have a question about like what would be the best location for you to go to, feel free to reach out, shoot me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat. But if that is all, thank you everyone so much for coming to Friday Forum. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah. Good luck to everyone taking part.